Good evening. This is John Milburn for Laws 11057 Introduction to Law. This is week 1 of term 2, 2019. We have a great roll up. Thank you very much for attending this live session. We have a lot to cover. Having said that, tonight is more of a chat and an orientation, introduction, than a lot of substance. The first thing that I'm keen to do is to have you participate. So that means feel free to unmute your microphone and to have a chat. If you're not speaking, the general rule is to mute the microphone. Same applies to me. And the reason for that is to avoid any background material noise coming through. For those of you that haven't used the Zoom platform previously, please find the chat facility. You'll find that in the row at the bottom of your screen. And if you then activate the chat facility on your right, you'll be able to see the discussions. So have a practice. Say hello. Let us know something about you as we proceed. Now, some of you have left your camera on, which I think is great. I really encourage that. Some have turned the camera off, and that's fine too. Whatever suits you. But what I would encourage you to do is work actively during our sessions. What I mean by that is this is not a passive section. This is not a passive exercise. I do expect you to be working while we're having our weekly discussions. That can take two forms. To some degree, it depends on me and my mood. If I'm in a really bad mood, which is not very rare, it's normally pretty good, but if I'm in a really bad mood, it might mean that I select you and I say, XYZ, tell me all about terra nullius, for example. When I was at law school in the 70s, one of the lecturers in commercial law was very good at his job. He was an excellent lecturer, but had us all slightly on edge because he would randomly select a student to answer a question, and this is in front of the large live audience. So it always kept us on our toes, and it was probably a good thing, even though at the time it felt very bad. So that may happen. Now, the other thing that you might want to do when you're actively working is this. We have a lot of technology. We have audio-visual sessions, so let's make advantage of that. You'll hear a lot of my stories. I'm sorry about that, but I've been around for a while, so there'll be a lot of war stories and things. So the first is that when I was studying law, of course, we didn't even have computers. We didn't even have photocopiers when we started. That was a new innovation, and fax machines was absolutely magic when I first started. So we're going back a long time. But suffice to say that when I was studying law at law school, we certainly didn't have computers. Now, given that you've got access to computers, what you can do is, as we're proceeding, if I refer to a word, a phrase, a legal concept, a website, I refer to legislation, please feel free to work the system. Get on to your favourite means of accessing legislation and have a look at an act. So if, for example, I mention, just out of the blue, the Acts Interpretation Act, Queensland, you should be able to find that very quickly. Now, just as a straw poll, using the chat facility, so we can get the fingers going, who could tell me if they think they could find the Acts Interpretation Act Queensland within the next, say, 15 seconds. So I don't want you to do it. Just tell me yes or no if you think you could do that. Could you find yes? Oh, we're getting a lot of answers. 15 seconds is an eternity online, isn't it? We're getting a couple of one or two no's. Think so. All right. So during this evening, I'll give you lots of homework to do. And this is not homework that's on Moodle. This is not in your textbook. It's basically things that I make up on the go. So the first exercise is this. I want you to find, during the week, or if you're really keen now, the Acts Interpretation Act Queensland, and I want you to tell me how you found it. Honestly now, How many of you would simply Google Acts Interpretation Act Queensland in order to find it? We're getting a few nods. There's nothing wrong with Googling, and you probably, and I still use that as a technique. However, there are better ways to go. There are more established ways in laws, in the study of law, on how to access basic legal information. Queensland Parliament, yeah, maybe. Any other thoughts? Who knows of a website? And you can unmute your microphone or you can type in the facility. I'm getting a few
the
votes.
Queensland legislation page.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. Absolutely. So we're getting equal number of votes, probably a few more for Australia and Legislation Queensland. Alicia uses that at work. That's good. Now, the official source of the legislation is legislation.qld.gov.au, but we all, in practice, we all use Australia. Australia is excellent. Because it's not necessarily the authorised source on each occasion, sometimes it is, that doesn't mean you should discount it. But they're probably the two that you'll get used to the most: Legislation Queensland and Australia. Australia is AUSTLII. From memory, it's capital A, small UST, and then capital L, capital I, capital I. All right. So the next exercise for you during the week is you must know how to access Australia, and you must know how to access legislation.qld.gov.au. Now, it's not just a matter of getting there. When you arrive, I want you to spend minimum 20 minutes looking around. Odds are you'll spend more than that because it's interesting. And I want you to find things, go on a bit of a voyage of discovery here in relation to those basic websites that you need to do. Now, just a quick straw poll. Given what I'd said earlier about being proactive and working as you're going, how many of you have found Australia or Queensland legislation or both as I've been speaking? Both, yes, yes, yes. Good, excellent. How many of you have a system for bookmarking websites and things of that nature? We all do? Okay. How many of you bookmarked? So you've already, Matthew had already bookmarked them, already done. So we're away. Now, I'll just give you an idea of what I use for my bookmarks. There's no magic in this. So I've got bar, meaning, so I'm a barrister, so the bar meaning things to do with being a barrister is one. CQU, I've bookmarked that. So all of my material for CQU. Then I've got digital library. And in the digital library, I've got 3 subheadings: services that are free, services that are paid, and the third one, because I do quite a lot of criminal law work, is prosecutions, trials, and sentencing. So these are just the subheadings under digital library for online resources. Then I've got my private stuff. Then I've got legal resources, and under that I've got bench books, handbooks, and manuals. Under that, practice directions and rules. Then I've got videos, training, and webinars, and then I've got general. And then I'm a member of the Mental Health Review Tribunal, so I've got MHRT. Then I've got office, meaning my own personal office, QCAT, because I'm a member of QCAT. And then I've got a kind of catch-all technology area. So whatever works for you. I just mention that because that works for me, and it means that I can quickly access the material that I'm likely to need to use. However, you need to balance this, don't you? You can't go crazy about this. You need to have something that actually works. What's the point of having 27,000 sites bookmarked if it means that in practice, under pressure, you can't find what you're looking for? So be selective and be thoughtful, and be prepared to be a little tough on yourself in terms of whether something genuinely needs to be catalogued in a way that works for you or not, because it's so easy just to bookmark everything. Now, as a guide to the way in which I think, and again, this is just me, this doesn't mean it's right. You can look at the Moodle site and you kind of get an idea that I like simplicity, not too many words if possible, and something that's logical and hopefully fairly clear in terms of your ability to find things. Now, if you believe that I'm fanciful in describing the way that I've set up the Moodle site in that way, please let me know, and I'm very happy to receive constructive criticism in terms of what I'm doing. But it gives you an idea of at least the way I think about structuring your work. So as you proceed through law, remember that it's not a matter of necessarily knowing the law, but it's a matter of understanding how lawyers think, understanding where to access the law, and then being able to communicate in a logical manner what it is that you're trying to communicate. So they're kind of the basics, aren't they? So this unit will be, I'll be taking this unit from the perspective of legal practitioners, but I understand that many of you won't actually practice in law, and that's fine. But I do want you to at least understand what lawyers do, how we go about our practice, and that way, if you're involved with lawyers, even though you may have your law degree, you may not be a lawyer, but you'll better understand the process, the thinking, and the way in which we go about accessing the law. I mentioned that you don't necessarily have to know the law. You'll certainly, by the end of the course, you'll know a lot of law, but in terms of percentages, you'll know a little bit, but not a whole lot. What you'll know by the end of the course very well is the way to think about law and how to access the law and how to put it into a logical format. But as for certain legal questions every day, every lawyer has to look that up. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just know a little bit of the law. People say, you'll get this too, at a barbecue or something. Someone will talk about something that was relevant to them that's in relation to a legal matter. Let's say it's to do with, red light cameras. And they may have looked up and found some regulation that deals with it. And they might say, well, as you know, the law relating to red light cameras is this. And to be honest, I'll say, I don't know. I didn't know. I'd have to look that up. I don't remember these things, and I don't expect you to remember these things. But I do expect you to have the legal logic to understand the process and be able to access the material, hopefully fairly quickly, to get to the right answer. So a comment here from Deborah: you will therefore become an expert in your field, not a jack of all trades. And I think that's a fair comment. So what I'm suggesting that you need to do in terms of looking at Austerley and Queensland legislation, or legislation Queensland, is to know those basic websites, know how to work your way around them, have them bookmarked, preferably for easy access, in a logical manner that makes sense to you, and then build on that process. So as you're studying the text, as you're working your way through the material on Moodle, you're thinking about, how am I going to use this in a practical sense? If you want, you can just do enough to get through the exam and pass the unit, and that's okay. But what I'd really like you to do is think about how you're going to use the information that you get during this unit into the future. And that means maybe spending a little bit of time on the bigger picture and not just the practicalities of getting through the unit. Now, does that make sense? Are we all good with that? All right. And there's no right or wrong answer here. The way I like to do things is, I'm sure, very different to the way that others do things. For example, I like to use my voice to record a lot of my work. Most people don't do that, and they prefer to type, and that's fine. I prefer, in court, for example, to work off my computer, my laptop, so that as I'm in court, if I'm asking questions or making submissions, I'll be working straight off the screen. But most lawyers don't do that. Most prefer paper. So there's no right or wrong answer to this, but you need to be honest with yourself and start to reflect upon what works for you and what's likely to be of benefit to you into the future and when you're under pressure. Jamie says, I've got a voice recorder on my Apple Watch. In case I can't remember what said, I record their consent. That's a great idea. That's really good. Just make sure that if you're recording, there are some circumstances where you need to get their consent. Other times you can record without letting the other party know. That's just an aside. So think about what the circumstance might be in the future and determine how to do it. So another thing I do is, I can record something on my phone and then upload it to be typed through the program that I use down the track. One thing I used to do, I won't do this to you, I won't inflict this on you unless somebody really wants to, is have a test we have a challenge in week 12 where I'll take on any comers that actually type, and I'll use my voice to record the written word, and we'll have a race, see who's more accurate and faster. I think I'm undefeated at this stage. Anyway, I'm just saying that. On that point, you might say, why do I use my voice to record my work when I should be typing? Well, partly it's historic. When I was going to school, I never saw a typewriter. So I'd never really learned how to touch type, not properly anyway. So for me, it's a speedier thing. But there are some other advantages in using your voice. I think that in preparing work in law, using your voice is a great way to train yourself in terms of logical thinking, in that you've got to think in advance as to how to set out the material and present it, which therefore means it's good training for those of you that wish to be advocates in some manner or not. So as I'm working and generating my written material, I'm also, because I'm using my voice, training myself in terms of advocacy. So what do I mean by advocacy? Mostly court work, but in law, advocacy, I think, can be generally used for oral communication. So feel free to unmute your microphone or use the chat facility. Give me some idea, you think, of how oral or advocacy, as I've termed it, oral advocacy, might be used in law. What are some of the skills? How would you apply your advocacy skills in practice? I've mentioned one, court. Any others? Your ability to use your voice to communicate. Mediation. Yes, Jason. Rachel says tribunals. Very good. Renee says talking to clients. Excellent. Researching. Yep. Advocacy to help a client understand what's happening and how things will be done. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Samara. Negotiation, says Lucy. Very good. So these are all advocacy-based skills. When you're talking to a colleague, you're practicing your advocacy. If you're talking to your employer, advocacy. So here's another exercise that I want you to start using during this week. This week, I want you to be very conscious of your voice. I want you to start sounding a little bit like a lawyer, whatever that might be for you. There's no right or wrong answer here, but I want you to think about the tone of your voice. I want you to think about the way in which you express yourself orally through the choice of words, the timing of your voice. Now, so no more grumpy mum voice. That's right. Well, the grumpy mum voice might be very effective in certain circumstances, but I want you to think about your voice. Don't be so Australian is a good tip. Well, yes, but I don't want you. I don't want you to become a 1950s Australian news reader. Has anyone seen those old news reels? They sound so British. It's just so. I'm not saying pompous or anything else. Paul's got it. Be clear and concise. Thank you. Probably best to avoid combining words by accident. Yes. I don't want to change you for the worse. I want to change you just a little bit for the better. I want you to think about you as a lawyer, even though you may not practice in law. You're studying law now. So that's what we're going to do. Using a patter, maybe having some stock phrases that you use. Suzanne says, I have 15 toddlers a day, might have to practice my lawyer voice on them. Absolutely. Practice your negotiation skills. Practice your persuasion skills as part of it as well. See if you can persuade. And think about using your voice in different ways. Maybe you use your voice by lowering the tone, slowing it down a little, and sometimes pausing can have a real good effect. Good effect. Terrible. So just try it. Just be very conscious of your voice. And at the same time, I want you to identify through listening to people, television, movies, whatever it might be, examples of people that really resonate with you in terms of their ability to communicate orally. And perhaps, if you wish, pick up a few tips and use those for yourselves. So this week, all week, I want you to be thinking about your voice. Paul mentioned clear and concise. Now, why did I like that? Why do you think it's important to be clear and concise, both in the study and practice of law? Clear and concise. I'm saying it's a good thing. Why? Very good. Jamie says, getting to the point. Rebecca says, to avoid miscommunication. Oh, you're so quick, I can't keep up with you. Amy says, to get the message across. Grace says, people can understand what you're trying to convey. You can get your point across. You can build a better relationship with clients through clear language, says Chris. So there's no misconceptions in the information, Tani. Law is confusing. Our job is to help others understand it. Excellent response, Emily. It gives you clarity to your message. Suzanne, interpretation, says Brandon. No room for grey, Christine. Everyone can understand, says Zachary. And to ensure the clients understand what you're advising. I can't keep up with you all. They're all excellent reasons. So as you're thinking about your oral communication skills this week, think about the clarity with which you communicate. Straightforward, to the point, simple is much better than verbose, complex, rambling. You know what I mean. So your task in communicating is, give me an answer here, just A or B. A, to demonstrate how clever you are, or B, to benefit the recipient of your communication. Good. We're getting Bs. And LOL, Emily, that wasn't one of the responses, but you got the point. So yes, the idea of communication is to provide some benefit to the recipient. If you want, I'll allow you this. If you want to throw in a little bit of pomposity, just a few words here and there because you like language and you really feel that's a bit of fun, you can do that. That's okay. But for the most part, 95% of the time, Your job is to simplify your language, not to complicate it. Now, when I started, it was the opposite. When I started in law, in studying in the 70s and then starting to practice in the early 80s, the emphasis was on lengthy sentences. And if you look at leases or mortgages, for example, that were drafted in the 70s, they're very long sentences. If you read judgments from some of the judges from that period or before, it's very confusing. And they use complicated words. And instead of the simple alternative, they seem to go out of their way at times to use the difficult. Now, it's not just me saying this. What I'm suggesting to you about clarity and simplicity is part of a legal movement. Can anyone tell me what that legal movement is? Have you come across it in your reading? Emily's got it, plain English, also known as plain language. So that's the gold standard now, is to communicate in a way that is plain and clear. When you present your assignment work, and I mark it, and I mark all my own work in units, so it will vary. So in different units that you study throughout CQU, it's probably the case that you'll find that many lecturers don't mark their own assessment work. They have markers to do that. I prefer to do all of my marking because I know what I'm looking for. We do have a moderation process so that others get to check what I'm doing, etc. But when you're presenting work to me and I'm reading it, bear in mind that your individual work, as important as it is perhaps one of 100 papers that I might be checking. So make it easy for me, as you would any person who's receiving your work, in having it well set out, easy to follow, and logical. When I say well set out, what that means is that you're perfectly entitled, for example, in your written work, to include headings, maybe subheadings. You can number paragraphs if you wish, if that enhances the suitability. You can include a table of contents if you think that what you're producing requires a table of contents for better communication. You certainly need to, and here's one of my, this is one of my 5% words. I really don't need to say this, but you must paginate your work. You know what paginate is, don't you? Can anyone tell me plain English for paginate? Number the pages. Yes, I could have just said number the pages, but I say paginate. So make sure that you number your pages, because that's what we expect in the profession. If you haven't already done so, have a look at a sample document that I've put into Moodle. I think it's under assessments or additional resources. It's not particularly, it's not the most well set out document I've ever seen. It's okay, but it gives you a guide as to the way in which you have to set out your material. Katie's raised a really good point, a really good issue, and that is bullet points. This is a personal matter for me. I'm not a great fan of bullet points. If they're numbered, that sometimes is better than bullet points, but bullet points are okay. But for me, just don't overdo it. There's a place for them, but sometimes I see a paper and it's all bullet points. And I don't know, it's a little bit startling to me. And there are some other things too. For example, I don't like over capitalization. So, you know, unless there's some particular reason for doing so, when you're writing in law, you don't have to say the capital C contract is capital S signed by the capital P parties. Just say the contract is signed by the parties, or lowercase. Can anyone tell me, from a legal drafting perspective, why you might actually go against what I've just said and capitalise words that in ordinary English usage would not be capitalised? Oh, Rachel's onto this. And Paul is too. I'm just holding back the answer so you can think about it for a sec. Right, Rachel says definitions, absolutely. And Paul says a name or a title. And Grace says emphasising importance. Very good. Rachel, do you want to, I'm going to pick on you now. Do you want to tell us what you mean by definitions?
So I'm actually a paralegal, just FYI. And so if there's like a specific term within, you know, like say a lease that's, I don't know, like premises, for example, the word premises would be, I don't know, 123 ABC Street. And then the word premises would then be capitalised throughout the entire document because it's got that specific definition.
Spot on. Thank you, Rachel. That's good. And thank you for talking there to give me my tea break. So absolutely. So using, lawyers often do this. It's a technique where we define a particular thing and capitalise the word that follows. So it might be, for example, if you're preparing some pleadings or you're writing a letter, you might refer to a contract entered into between A and B in relation to property at 10 Smith Street at whereverville, in brackets, the open single quote, capital C contract, close single quote, close brackets, full stop. Then in the next paragraph, you might say the capital C contract was signed by the capital P parties on the 10th of May 2019. Does that make sense? I hope that between Rachel and I hope that's all good. All right. So that's an example of how lawyers might write in their communication skills. Paul says a name or a title. So yes, a name, as we've discussed for Rachel, or a title, particularly in headings. Matthew says if they've been capitalised in a will, they need to be replicated in probate capitalised. Matthew, do you want to elaborate on that a bit? I think I'm getting what you mean, but I'll just get you to. I'm putting you on the spot here, aren't I, Matthew? Or capitalised a typo. Okay. And yeah, so Katie says reference to the signed open quote capital C contract, close single quote, etc. Yes, that's the idea. So just practice that a bit. And the rationale behind that is by capitalising that particular word, we are identifying it with some degree of precision. We're not talking about any contract. We are now talking about the capital C contract, the one that we've defined earlier in the document, and it means that we then can avoid some nasties. You'll see some nasties in poorly drafted, particularly older documents. So here's one of the nasties that we don't use anymore. You know, the contract between the parties, 10 Smith Street, dated the 1st of May, blah, 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 full stop. The said contract, we don't say that anymore. We don't use legalese like the said or proximo or ultimo or so herein before referred to. We don't do that anymore. So please, when you're writing your material, don't include what we call legalese. If you don't know what we mean by legalese, look it up, find out what it is and read about it. Then avoid it. Okay, so simplicity. The other nasty is unnecessary repetition. Given that we're looking for something that's clear, concise, Using as little words as possible to convey the meaning. We don't want to repeat. The contract signed between A and B dated the 10th of May, and then 2 paragraphs later say, the contract being the contract signed between A and B dated the 10th of May. That's an unnecessary repetition, so you've got to find ways of avoiding that. Make it simple for the readers. So Rachel says, still use them in wills. Yep, that's right, still do. Okay, I hope I'm not going too fast, and you'll get the idea that tonight is really an orientation to thinking like a lawyer. So as you're reading anything this week, look out for something where you think it's poorly drafted, and ask yourself, why is this poorly drafted? Why don't I like this? And odds are it'll be that the sentences are too long and rambling, or that there's repetition, or there's nasties in there like pompous words or legalese, as we've already discussed tonight. Identify it, call it and say, that's a bad sentence. And it's a bad sentence because of this. So it's all part of your communication skills. And then if you're really keen, just think to yourself, how would I write this in a way that makes sense? Now, let's try and keep this communication thing going so it's not quite so abstract. From a practical perspective, can anyone give me some tips on how they might make their written communication simple and clear and concise? What are some tips? We've discussed a few already tonight. Anybody got some general advice? Because some of you might be saying, all right, so Deborah says, no legal jargon. Yes, that's good. Avoid legal jargon if you can. Rebecca makes a really good point, and that is proofread. That's so important. Kieran says, read it out loud. Excellent. Yes, I got that, Kieran. Thank you. And Deborah says, clear and precise wording. Yep. Katie says, have someone read your work. You could ask someone from a non-legal background to read it, see if they understand the intended message. That's a great response, Chris. Jamie says, make sure all stakeholders can read and understand the document. Helen says, avoid acronyms. Sorry, Eileen. Alicia says, attend to punctuation. That's important. I like the exclamation point. If you don't know what an Oxford comma is, look it up this week. That's also part of your homework. You've got lots of homework to do. Suzanne says, use simple sentence structures. I really like that. Grace says, put it through Google Translate in case you have dyslexia. I have to be careful because I started saying dyslexia and then it really has stuck. So dyslexia, I don't mean that disrespectfully. I just, if you notice me stumble, it's because of my bad habit. Katie says, aim for simplicity, and Samara says, shorter sentences. I really like that. So let's pick up on a couple of those suggestions. Suzanne says, use simple sentence structures. Katie says, aim for simplicity. Samara says, shorter sentences. Can you see a theme coming through here? Can anyone tell me about the difference between the active voice and the passive voice? Can anyone tell me the difference between the active voice and the passive voice? I know some of you are working hard as we speak, and you've probably found the answer online. Active voice is telling the story, passive is repeating it. It's a guess. Not quite, not what I'm looking for. Who has found it yet? Active, passive receives the action. Yes, Rebecca. Caitlin says modality. I'm not sure what that means, I'm sorry. Christine says, is active when I'm pacing while yelling at my kids? Not quite. So we're not talking about an aerobic session. All right, so some more homework for you this week is understand the difference between active and passive and then apply it. All right, we're getting some more answers. One stands out active while the other goes unnoticed, given little attention. Not quite. Catherine says first person. Can be, but not quite. Active performs the actions. Thanks, Google, says Rebecca. Yes. The active voice is engaged where the passive is slow and uninteresting. Yes. Jamie says emphasising certain words. We're getting close, but we're not quite there yet. So look up active versus passive. Active voice is the doing active voice. Sentence is the subject that performs the action. Yes, we're getting closer now. That was Deborah. Okay, so guess which one I will encourage you to write in. Do you think I'll encourage you to write in the active voice or the passive voice? Active, active, active. Everyone is saying active for sure. Spot on. When I started studying law, passive voice was the way to go because it sounded more intelligent. And if you do some research, you'll see why lawyers perhaps thought that speaking in the passive voice sounded more intelligent. So, as you're reading material, watching TV, watching a movie, whatever it might be, or just talking to people, I want you to think about the way in which they have used sentence structure and ask yourself, is this active or is this passive? I'm not sure what that means, Glenn, but active or passive, and then to apply it and start to speak in the active voice. So this week you've got a lot of homework, a lot of self-reflection, and I want you to be practicing it. What I've come to realise, and it took me a long time to realise this, Paul's got it. Paul's been doing some work on the side. The active voice describes a sentence, whereas the subject performs the action stated by the verb. It follows a clear subject plus verb plus object construction that's easy to read. With some examples. Thank you, Paul. All right. From what I've talked about this evening, you can glean that law is something that resembles the rest of the world, but it's a little bit different. It's got its own little quirks. And what we're doing in this unit is we're just introducing you to the club. We're going to give you some of the little inside secrets that make you look, sound, and read like you're a lawyer, because it's got a definite feel about it. You can tell a lawyer if you're really looking, even though it's in disguise. And when you're communicating with other lawyers, you can definitely tell whether someone is, if you like, in the club or not. So we want you to get to that stage. Now, I'm not saying there's anything sinister about this, and I'm not saying there's anything which is grandiose or secretive about it. It's just that good lawyers have good communication skills, orally and in writing, and we want you to emulate that and work towards having those skills. Law, in some ways, also resembles acting. Now, you might think, oh, that's a bit weird to say that, but I think it's true. Good lawyers are, to some degree, good actors. That's just one of the aspects. Why would I say that? Why would I say that there is some similarity? Not that I know much about acting, but why would I say that there is some degree of acting involved in the practice of law? Deborah says you need to act in everything that you do. Kind of do. Yep. In a courtroom setting, yes, definitely. In a courtroom setting, the way in which you communicate is a little bit like the older style movies where people spoke very clearly and you could hear every word they say. A lot of movies now, I say, what did they say? I didn't catch that. It's sort of like it's all too quick, but you get the idea. Others are, because law, wow, you're getting some good ones here. You need to be confident in what you're saying within a courtroom, says Deborah. Tani says, perhaps it takes personal feelings, emotions out of the situation. That's a really good point. Katie says, because law is an art and you need to be creative like an actor would be, and law is surprisingly creative. Good response, Katie. Suzanne says, put aside your personal fears and ideas to get the message across, or play the role. That's really important. Objectivity is extremely important. Grace says, rehearse your lines, but in a more legal sense, of course. Yes. Paul says, you must perform your best even when you are not at your best. Exactly. Professionalism is a huge part of this. Deborah says, you need to be able to think on your feet. Yes, that's an important aspect. And practice techniques that will allow you to do that. Catherine says, give people and clients confidence in your abilities. Also, remember, of course, that when you are a law student or a practicing lawyer, you are representing more than just yourself. You are representing your cohort, your fellow students in Laws 11057. When you are part of that cohort, you're in a way representing your university, and you're in a way representing the profession. So as from tonight, I want you to feel as though you are part of something bigger. You are part of this unit, you are part of this law course, and you're now part of the profession. So on behalf of the profession, may I welcome you to it. So thank you for joining the profession. Think and sound and talk and write like a lawyer. And you're representing your future as well. Okay. Paul says, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. Welcome aboard. All right, so just in that spirit, if you were to meet a judge, let's say a district court judge in a private setting, what's the appropriate salutation if you meet a district court judge at a private function to show that you're now part of this law group? One of the little things that we do. How would you greet a district court judge? What's the appropriate salutation? Your Honour. We're getting a few votes for Your Honour. Sir or Madam, perhaps. Dear Judge. All right, so the answer is, in court, most definitely Your Honour. In a private setting, the usual accepted way to greet a judge is simply Judge. So if you meet a district court judge in a private setting and you're introduced to the district court judge, please feel free to say, hello, Judge, or introduce yourself. Judge, I'm a law student. May I introduce myself? You're part of this group now. We're introducing you to the group. If it's a magistrate, it would normally be the name, the surname, Mr. or Ms. And for example, but for a judge, it's normally Judge. You can say Judge, XYZ, but you don't have to. Judge on its own is sufficient. All right, I've been doing a lot of talking. Are you hanging in there? All right, now what I'm going to do is provide you with an explanation and an apology all in one, and it's to do with the first assessment. I'm sure that you're all very diligent and you have done a few things in relation to the assessment. The first is that the first assessment is due on 8 August. It's not far away. It's a simple assessment, but it's got some twists. The first is that you cannot yet create the online portfolio because I need to do some work and I need to produce that work to Associate Professor Scott Beattie, who does some further backroom work, and that then comes back to me and I'll let you know that it's done. The backroom work to set up your online portfolio has not yet been done. I'll explain why in a moment, which means that if you try to set up your CQU Law account in accordance with the instructions now, it won't happen. You need to give me a few more days or perhaps a week, and I'll give you the all clear. Now, that's not to say that you can't start doing the first assessment, because Matthew tried and failed, yes, and that's the reason, Matthew. So that's the apology and the explanation, but it will change, it will get easier. What you can do is you can start preparing your, I don't know, Word document, I guess most people would use, and that is preparing the content that you will then include into your online portfolio. So I'll give you the all clear when you can go and start to actually have this online presence. But in the meantime, please start the document. Rain says, I've got it in a document already, so that's good. So you're making a start. This is not a difficult exercise. If you can get your online portfolio and learn the technology, then you've got something with which you can build into the future. And I encourage you to work towards undertaking the unit called Legal Professional Portfolio, which is taken by Associate Professor Scott Beattie. This is the very start of this process. It also provides you with an online presence. Google have provided this to the university to pass on to you for free. So it's actually something that you can really use in practice. Now, I know some of you will say, look, I'm not practicing in law, I don't intend to practice in law, I don't want something that I can use for employment. Well, don't worry, provided you show me that you're using the technology and you write and you appear, you know, your communication skills are good, I'm not that concerned about the specific content. So, for example, if you know, if you say, well, I'm young and I haven't had that many experiences in the past, well, don't worry, tell me what you have had, and I'll treat it on the basis that that's what you've done at this stage. So, in other words, you know, if you happen to have climbed Mount Everest and been a Prime Minister and won a gold medal, that doesn't of itself mean that you'll get more marks than if you have succeeded in a more modest way. Do you understand what I'm getting at? So it's really the technology and the way in which you write. Jamie says it's a glorified resume. Yes, exactly. Think of it that way. Plus the questions and the video, you're on the right track, Jamie. That's what it is. And if you know what you're doing, you'll think, wow, I get 20% for this. That's so easy. And I do give out a lot of good marks for this first assessment, but make sure you get it in on time. Gray says, may sound silly, however, are we able to submit a draft and how do we do that? Look, with some unit coordinators, you can prepare drafts and submit them, but not with me, I'm sorry. So what you've got to do is make the call, submit the work as your final work, and then I'll mark it and I'll provide you with feedback. What you can do is look at some of the documents I've already prepared and proceed from there. Now, Paul says the ALC. Is that the Australian Law Council, Paul? Is that what you mean? Or are you talking about the Australian Guide to Legal Citations? The AGLC. Oh, Academic Learning Centre. Sorry, I didn't realise which acronym you were talking about. Yes, Academic Learning Centre will, no, thank you. I believe that they do look at draft documents at the Academic Learning Centre. So don't send the drafts to me, but the ALC may be able to assist you. Thank you for that, Paul. All right, so the first assessment is not something you should stress about. We'll get the technology organised soon, and I'll let you know, but in the meantime, start working on your content. The second assessment due on the 19th of September is a toolkit. It really builds in many ways on the first assessment. And once again, it's something where I want you to prepare something that works for you, that has some benefit for you down the track. And the idea is that you're preparing something that is workable for you into the future. So I want you to personalize this. We've given you, I think, a pro forma in relation to the first one. There's no pro forma for the second. So work something that works for you, but do so within some of the guidelines that we've discussed tonight. Then we come to the third one, the briefing paper, worth 40% of the overall assessment. And this is released on the 10th of October on a Thursday evening, and it's due the next night on a Friday evening. I just thought I'd be mean and ruin Friday night for those of you that enjoy going out on a Friday night. So on the 11th of October, you can go out Friday night, absolutely, provided you've already uploaded your briefing paper for me to consider. And you can enjoy it. So maybe look at it that way. For those of you that have to work on Friday, at least you've got Friday night to prepare the work. I believe that I have provided you with some previous examples of the types of work that I expect students to prepare in briefing papers. Did I in fact upload some past ones? Does anyone tell me? Where's some past ones? Amy's nodding. Now, when you read that, did you think, oh my God, that's too hard? Or was it okay? Yes, sure did. All right. No, says Deborah. Good. That's what I like to see. I have a great emphasis on communication. You've already gleaned that from tonight. I also emphasize legal research. And remember, of course, that you're not expected to know the law, but you're expected to be able to find the law and communicate. So the advantage of a briefing paper is that you have full access to online resources, provided you've gone through the work of organizing yourself in terms of where you find the law, then you'll be able to answer these questions quite well as a result of the skills that you develop without actually knowing the answer before you start. So when you open the paper, you won't know the answer, but the task is to find it using your skills and then to provide a response in a professional manner. Okay, any questions about what we've covered tonight? Oh, Katie says, do I recommend registering with the Law Society? Absolutely. And I think in additional resources under the heading of practice, there is a link to the student membership application form with the Queensland Law Society. It's quite cheap and it will definitely make you feel part of this larger group. And there is a form there. Thank you, Katie. All right, any questions about what we've covered or the assessments in particular? You've been very patient. All good? Yes, Jamie?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was just wondering, obviously I've never done law before, but the only thing that kind of worries me is the legal research. I've been looking at all the websites that you've suggested. However, I was just wondering, if is it ever possible to give, for example, like a fake case through the CQ email so that I'm able to research it and then send it back, and so that you can kind of tell me if I'm on the right track or not? Or is that probably not possible?
Well, I guess to be honest, one of the
Sense.
problems I've got is time. So, but what I can suggest is this. Have you looked at the past papers, Jamie? The briefing papers? Maybe you could look at that, and then as you're working your way through the legal research, try to answer those problems. Might be a good way to do it. Another thing that you can do is subscribe to things like Jade Barnett, which I would encourage you to do, and you'll get a list of current cases, and you can try to answer some of those questions as if you were researching. So you get to see what the judge says as the legal conclusion on some facts, but see if you can go through that exercise of determining, well, how did the judge come to that conclusion? And Emily says it will get easier as you work through your textbook, and that's true. So certainly don't be overwhelmed in the first week, but I like your style, Jamie, in terms of trying to think of some facts, and perhaps I can present something. So what we could do is you could upload material, and I'll certainly look at that. What I like to do is share material as well. So if you do have a response, you could perhaps look at that, uploading that, and we could all look at it together. I hope that answers your question in a way, Jamie. Thank you. All right. So Christine says the internet was buffering. What are the sites to look up for cases and judgments? At this time, just look up Ostly and Legislation Queensland and Jade Barnett, Jade Barnett. And with Jade Barnett, you can subscribe, and in fact you can for Queensland judgments as well. so that you can receive up-to-date material. All right. Any other questions, comments? All good? Now, Rain, you've got some, with that last assignment, you may have to take a day off from school. Go and negotiate. Use your lawyer's skills to say, here's a problem and here's my proposed solution. Rebecca says in terms of YouTube, for the videos for assessments 1 and 2, just short. I'm really, particularly 1, I'm just looking for something. In fact, I wasn't sure there wasn't a video in assessment 2, but the assessment just short. It's mostly so that I can see that you've got a lawyer type appearance and voice and style of speaking, and that you know the technology. So it really doesn't have to go for more than a minute. I forget what guideline I've said, so go with the guidelines online if there is one, but not long. Any other questions? Good. All right. Dodgy internet as well. Okay, well, we'll call it a night for this evening. Thank you very much for your participation. I look forward to seeing you next week. Please ask questions through Q&A, and we'll enjoy this unit. All the best. See you then.